Jessie with the Cabarrus County Library, and I'm excited you're here for Kid Krafters. Every month with Kid Krafters, we learn a new skill or technique, and then you can use that at home to make the craft we're going to make today, or do something that's totally your own. Are you ready? Let's get started. So today in Kid Krafters, we're going to combine two art techniques into one piece of artwork, and we are going to make watercolor silhouettes. So the first art technique we're going to learn is how to cut out a silhouette. A silhouette is the outline of something. Think of a shadow on the ground and you just see the outline of the object on the ground. That's a silhouette. I have a tree silhouette here. That is the first thing we're going to learn. Then the next thing we're going to learn is how to paint with watercolors. And watercolors are just a medium of paint that use water to spread and mix your pigments around to get the look you desire. So we're going to learn how to do those two things, and then in the end we're going to put them together for one really cool piece of art. All right, so the supplies that we need today are supplies for silhouette cutting and supplies for watercolor painting. To do our silhouettes, you need a solid sheet of paper. I'm gonna use black when I do mine, but you can use any color. This is just construction paper, and you can use any color that you want. That will be for the silhouette. You're gonna need something to draw or trace with. I've got a pencil, that works really well. And you also need scissors for your cutting. Then for watercolor painting, you're going to need something to paint on. You can get fancy watercolor paper. You can also just use any kind of thick paper that you have. This is construction paper. You could use anything that's thick. If you use really thin paper, sometimes it will rub off or even tear up when you put water on it and make a mess. So thick white paper. You're gonna need a paintbrush. You need some water. And you need your watercolors. When we get to that section, we'll talk about the different kinds of watercolors you can use, but any watercolor you have at home will work. And then lastly, you'll need some kind of glue because we're gonna put our two pieces together. So I've got a glue stick, I've got liquid glue, you can use glue dots, you could use tape, anything you have that will stick the two pieces together. Once you get all your supplies, you can come back and we'll get started. Okay, so we are going to start our project by drawing and cutting out our silhouettes. So you will need your scissors, something to draw with. I'm using a pencil because that shows up really well on black construction paper. And I've also got the paper that I'm going to be watercoloring later, and I will explain why. All right, let's get started with the silhouettes. Okay, your first decision is to decide what silhouette you're going to make. I've got some examples here. This is a mountain scene with some trees. Got a little bird sitting on a tree branch or a wire. There's a spooky cat. I think what I'm going to actually do is a tree because it's October, it's fall. We're gonna do a spooky tree silhouette. So we'll put these examples to the side. And we're gonna start with our piece of watercolor paper. And that gives us an idea of how much room we have to work with. Here is my black construction paper. And I think when I do my tree, I'm going to do it this way. So to make a silhouette, all you have to do is draw the outline of the shape. You can do that by drawing. I'm gonna draw it with a pencil. You can also cut out a picture out of a magazine or print a picture on a computer. Lay your picture down and trace it. Any of those things will work. You just have to get the basic outline. So I'm going to start, I'm gonna do a tree. Here's my trunk. Then we're gonna do some branches without leaves because it's fall. The things to remember when you're doing a silhouette are you just need the basic outline. Whatever you want your picture to be, you just need an outline of it to get an idea of what it's gonna look like. You also need to use something that either you can erase or you can flip your paper over so you won't see the outline that you drew on your final artwork. I'm going to flip mine over. So if you decide to do it that way, just remember that your picture will be backwards. So whatever you draw will be backwards. Okay, so when you cut out a silhouette, it can be hard. You're gonna probably have a lot of little tiny cuts. For instance, here, I had a little tiny cuts around my tree. On the cat, there were a lot of little tiny cuts on his back. And it's good for you to do, you know, hard manual dexterity things. So even though it's hard, you just have to practice and really work turning your paper to make it easier to cut and to get into all the little tiny corners. And you're just gonna do that. You're gonna cut all along the outline that you drew. Tree is done. So now what I'm gonna do is take my tree and make sure it fits on my watercolor paper. And it does. If it didn't, no big deal. You could just see, like if it was too tall, maybe you could trim off some of the bottom. You could just go back and keep working. Do whatever you have to do to get it to fit on there. And that is a silhouette and how you draw and cut one out. Okay, the next step is to do our watercolor painting. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are lots of different kinds of watercolors you can use, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about each of them depending on what you have at your house. You'll know what to do with them. So I think most of us probably have pans of watercolors. These are little hard chunks of paint inside a plastic case. And to use this, all you have to do is take your brush and you put some water on your brush, you dip it on the paint, and you get the liquid watercolor on your paint, on your brush, and you can paint your paper with it. Another kind of watercolor you can use are watercolor pencils. And this is pigment in a pencil form. You draw or color with your pencil, then you take your brush, you dip it in the water, and you paint on top of the thing that you drew, and it smears the pigment around and turns the brush or the crayon strokes liquid on the paper, and then you can use that to mix and make your design on your paper. Another thing you might have are liquid watercolors. These are, it looks like colored water, and that's basically what it is watercolor already mixed with the water, the pigments and the water together. You pour it into one of these little pans or a bowl or a cup or whatever you have, and it comes out as liquid. Then you can paint just straight from the liquid watercolor onto your paper, or you can mix it with water to make it thinner and lighter colored. That's how you use liquid watercolors. And finally, these are watercolors that come in tubes. And when this comes out, it comes out as really thick. It almost looks like oil or acrylic paint. To use this, you also put it into a little pan or a plate or a bowl or cup, whatever you have, and you mix water with it. The more water you mix, the lighter your color gets. So for all the different types of watercolor, you still do the same thing. You take your color and you mix it with water and use that to make it darker or lighter to show up on your paper. So for our watercolor today, we are going to use, I'm using watercolor paper, but like I said in the beginning, you can use any kind of thick paper. I've got this little mixing palette, and I am using the tube watercolors, and I have just squirted my colors that I want to use in each little bowl. I have a separate one I can use if I want to mix them, or I can mix them on the paper. I've also got my water, my napkin, and my brush. Okay, because I'm making a spooky tree picture, I'm going to use some fall colors. I've got purple and orange, or a red, yellow, and a dark pink. And I am just going to make a swirly, whirly background. There are two different ways you can paint watercolor. One is to get your paper wet Then take your wet paint and paint on top of it that way. That gives you a thinner, paler look, and your colors will really mix together easily because your paper is wet. The other way to do it is start with dry paper and paint directly on the dry paper. And what that does is give you sharper, darker colors, and it's more easy to paint precise images because your paper's not wet, the paint doesn't mix as easily. So because I want a whirly background, I think I'm going to get my paper a little bit wet. So we'll just start here in the corner. We're just gonna put some water on our paper. The reason you wanna use thick paper is because you're getting it wet. If you use really thin, like computer paper, it could tear and rip, and it will ruin your beautiful artwork. And I'm just gonna start, we're gonna start with some purple up here in the corner. So I got a little bit of purple on my brush. A little more water on it. And here we go. And I'm just making a creative design so it doesn't have to be anything particular. I'm gonna drag it down to this other end of my paper. The more water you use with watercolors, the lighter your color gets. I don't know if you can tell, but as I add water, it gets thinner and paler. Up here at the top where I started with a lot of paint, it's much darker. And now let's mix another color in. Let's add, what do we want to add? How about down here in this corner, we're gonna add some pink. Oh no, this is red. Let's add some red. And we're gonna do it here in this corner. Oh, really red. Let's do some swirls over here. And I'm just gonna keep doing this until my whole page looks the way I want it to look. All right, now that I am done with my watercolor, I've let it dry. We have a really cool background for our silhouette. So I am going to use, I think I'm gonna use glue dots today. And I'm just going to put some glue dots on my tree. Make sure that if there are pencil lines or drawing lines, you use that side down so the pretty side faces out. You can add as much glue or as little glue as you want. I think this will be enough for our artwork today. And I'm just going to add it to the front of my watercolor. And here we go. We have a silhouette that we made on top of our beautiful watercolor picture. And you did art. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to do silhouette cutting and watercolor painting today. You can come to the library. We've got tons of cool paper and watercolor books you can check out along with other craft books. And you can join me back here or in the library next month in November for some special book crafts that we'll be doing. We'll see you then.